I will call this meeting of the Westwood Finance and Commission to order on October 8th. Give permission to the Westwood Media Center to record the meeting. I'll ask if there's anyone else that would like to record it. No. And Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, yes.
Bill Bruce,
Here.
Mike Gay, Alex Yale,
Here. Sorry, I messed up your whole system.
I know, it's fine. Chris Marks,
Here.
Chris Pareda,
Here.
Angela Hughes. Here. Christine Coughlin. Here. George Laham. George Laham. All right. What is this? Paul Bamford. Paul Bamford.
Here.
Seth Frederickson.
Here.
Susan Flanagan Cahill. Paul McLaughlin.
Here.
Did it.
And Ryan Sturman?
Ryan Sturmat is absent, and Mike Gay is absent.
Get Mike Powers.
Thank you, Mike Powers.
Nice job off the top of your head.
I know, that's
That was
really
pretty
good.
good. Sorry I messed
usually
with
have
your
them in
whole system.
alphabetical order. Here, you take this.
A quick update, and then we'll do public press. Welcome, Angela.
Thanks.
Welcome back to
Hello,
FinCom.
everyone. Hi.
For everyone that doesn't know, Angela Hughes is a prior FinCom member that's come back to join us again this fall. No real big updates from my perspective. We'll have after the public comment, we'll have the select board, Molly, Stephanie give an update, kind of state of the town, the financials for this meeting. And then for the next two meetings, we'll probably do hybrid or Zoom for those two meetings. And then back in person again in the new year fully. But yeah, I don't really have much else from an update standpoint. Nice job, Allison. Everything's in OneDrive now. I don't know if it's all organized so we can find everything. And so we'll go with our new agenda for this year into public comment section. So we'll allow for up to 15 minutes of public comment. During this public comment portion of the meeting, residents will be allowed to participate. They'll get up to 2 minutes to speak. You must identify yourself, your full name and address. As you speak, the Finance and Warrant Commission will not respond to questions. It's not a Q&A, it's simply a public comment. And you speak at the discretion of the chair. So I will open it up for public comment. Public comment. Seeing none, I will close public comment. And I will hand it over to Select Board Chair Rob Gotti and Interim Town Administrator Molly Fitzpatrick to walk us through the bulk of our meeting today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and great to see everybody again. It's great to be back here. We have a lot of things to touch on and a lot of good news to talk about. Welcome back, Angela, and welcome to the new faces around the table who are joining FinCom for the first time. This is part of the kickoff to our process for the annual budget process. I'll give a little bit of an overview of the state of the town, assisted by Molly, and Stephanie will then come in and give a sort of financial update on where we are for the year. So, with respect to the state of the town, the state of the town is strong. It's quite strong. We have, we're in excellent financial position, and the budget management has been outstanding. And we have recently had our AAA bond rating reaffirmed. We have some outstanding town services, from public safety to public works and human services. I'm joined by my select board chair, which he's now being here reminds me that I'm going to make a motion that we open our select board meeting here with you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Select board meeting is now open. So, as I was saying, state of town is strong. And thank you, Joe. It's very subtle. Our school system is outstanding, and we continue to see our town in demand. Home values are strong, and sales are on track for, I think we'll probably get somewhere in the vicinity of 150 new home sales this year. And time on market is down. I think it's down to like 15 days. So that gives you a sense of just how desirable our community remains for people looking to settle. We have been through some tumultuous times with respect to FS1. We had a recent town election where it did not receive the majority required for the financing of the project as proposed. Last night, we made a change in the way we approached it. There was some criticism of the first time around with the working group not being as open to the public. So last night, we held a public safety forum. There were about 150 people, give or take. A couple of our FinCom member friends were here at the high school, and there was robust discussion around 8 different options that were presented, pros and cons related to each. And so there was good, healthy discussion. At the end of that meeting, people were given some stickers to apply to poster boards for each of the 8 options. And our plan is to review what we heard, what we saw, and sort of narrow that field in some discussions at our select board meeting on the 20th of this month. As you know, we have now received our facility study both for the municipal side as well as the school side. And we have filled a few openings on the long-range financial planning committee. So we will begin taking that up in our November meeting, which will begin in earnest the review of, and as I said last night at the Public Safety Forum, let's be honest, we have more need than we have resource. And we're going to need to gather together around our collective family kitchen table here and figure out how we go forward to address as many of the needs that have been identified in those 2 studies as best we can, as creatively as we can, thinking about how do we work with what we have, repurposing and renovating, because we can't afford to build everything new. So, and I don't expect that is going to be a quick process. I think there's going to be a lot that we're going to need to dig into and a lot of conversation. And the commitment is to have those be evening meetings as best we can to ensure that people have an opportunity to come and participate and hear the discussion and ask questions. Now that we have, and you'll hear more of this from Stephanie, now that we have those facility studies that look out over a 10-year period at what the needs are from a maintenance perspective for those various buildings, we're incorporating that feedback into some of the feedback for the 5-year capital planning so that there's nothing out of sync with those figures. And then we continuously explore grant opportunities. That's one of the best parts about this job, is accepting grants. So, we will take that same approach with each and every building wherever we can find monies available at the federal and state level. I'm now going to hand this next section over to Molly, because she has really spent a great deal of time going through some emergency management procedures and working groups, and so I want to give her the opportunity to talk a little bit more about the work that's been done from an emergency preparedness standpoint.
Thanks, Rob. So this project started almost 2 years ago with Chris Coleman, the previous town administrator, in a desire to revamp our community emergency management plan, or SEMP. There's a lot of acronyms with emergency work. That plan had not been updated since 2011 and 2013, so it was a real major overhaul of what are the threats that are facing Westwood and how can we prepare the community in different ways to prepare for that. So that was some great work that came out of that. We've revived the Emergency Management Working Group, which has representatives from police, fire, and dispatch, which everyone would sort of assume, and also includes IT, human services, and myself, because the idea of an emergency or, a cyber attack, there's different things that weren't contemplated 10, 15 years ago when that SEMP was recently created. So, I'm really proud of the work that that group has been doing. This picture is from a tabletop exercise we did this past September, where we brought stakeholders from all departments, town and school, to run through a scenario of an emergency and, really role-playing who would be responding to what would the media strategy be. So it was a really collaborative effort that I just wanted to focus on here. Some other work the town has undertaken over the last year, the first two, the completion of the charter review and all alcohol licenses, this board saw this past spring. These went in front of town meeting and were passed. They are now at the legislature waiting for approval. Some other notes is we will be entering into negotiations with 5 of the municipal unions. Those 5 groups, police superiors, fire, DPW, and administrative, all expired June 30th, 2026. So the process of starting that negotiations has begun. There's some really great behavioral health and substance recovery resources that have become available to the town, specifically related to recovery coaching, providing an actual coach for those individuals who are actively in recovery from substances or alcohol. We're working very closely between our human services and health departments on how to push that message out. We're working on some all household mailers, so people will be seeing that soon. And then what I thought might be very interesting to this group is the pursuit of hybrid space. This is, I know, a very large committee, and it is nice to have a hybrid option. And we've sort of been patching it together where we could. In the past year, we were able to turn the smaller conference room into a true hybrid room. Has a bar across the TV, so you can have a committee like this meeting with a lot more effectively than, say, the OWL or the dreaded call-in feature. Last town meeting, we also received appropriation to retrofit this room into a true hybrid space. So that's a much larger project. We're still in the RFP phase for that. It involves microphones in the ceilings, but we'll really be able to have a back and forth sort of hybrid meeting space. So those are some of the key projects that we're working on.
Before you leave that, that's one of the things that, we're very appreciative of the fact that all of you are here, but we also know that many of you work and travel and, makes it challenging. And so, being able to continue to find folks willing to serve, we want to make it as easy as possible to ensure that we're getting excellent people who are willing and able to participate, and that hybrid space really helps enable that.
Mm-hmm.
Molly, what are the 5 unions that are coming up on June 2026?
Police superiors, fire, DPW, and administrative staff.
Didn't we just finish the fire contract?
The fire contract was out of contract for a while, so we ended up doing an FY 22-23 agreement and a 24-25-26 agreement, which is
So
the
they were all
standard.
retroactive, basically,
Yeah.
and
So-
now we're doing one going forward.
Correct.
Molly, do you know, in terms of the emergency management plan, in terms of like data and just securing data, I'm assuming, does the town have a good kind of like backup? Do they like back up all their electronic data, periodically? Are we at, okay. Anyway, I'm just curious if we're at risk of any ransomware or any threats like that.
We have a wonderful IT department, and that's why we brought them into that emergency management group, we recognize that is a real critical failure point, right? That would affect everything. And so that's why we brought them right in, but
Makes
yes,
sense.
we do have it.
Thanks.
I just, I didn't know if it was okay to ask questions, but
Before it
since you guys opened the door, I'm just curious, when you talk about the, the comprehensive emergency management plan,
Yeah, this one here.
and you're saying, I know you're saying you're sort of all hands on deck, are there, there's certain threats that you're seeing? I know, for instance, it happened in Dedham, it happened in Boston, just over the weekend, the ride outs, and they're looking for big spaces, and have you all been, do you know if the town's been part of that group,
Not that specific, I've read about that, I haven't heard that specifically, but we are in part of that. As part of the SEMP, we identified, critical infrastructure, which is obviously buildings and, different things like that. But it's also, what would be the key staging areas? Where would be the key
Yeah,
evacuation?
like the Target parking lot or
Exactly,
something,
and
yes.
so we, compiling the list now, so that if an emergency does arise, we can say, okay, these have been the vetted out points.
Yeah, I just, they had the murder over at BJ's, and that's just feels a little too close to us, and they're going, these groups are going everywhere.
These are just a highlight of our new team members. I'm not going to read everyone's name, but I did want to identify them. We had a number of retirements and promotions over the past year, and so we've been able to welcome in, a great fleet of new people who have been just adding tremendous value to all of the different departments. I will highlight some of these key promotions. So Felicia and Christy here in this office being promoted to really department head levels. William Shields getting a special license to become an HEO. Janice Donovan worked in the select board's office doing a lot of our admin and communication work, got promoted, now she's in the clerk's office. And then through a number of retirements, the police, and you can sort of see, it's a trickle down, right? So if a lieutenant retires, you promote a lieutenant, who then you promote a sergeant, then you promote a patrol officer. A special shout out right there to Thomas Moore, who was a dispatcher for a number of years, always wanted to be a police officer, and graduated through the academy recently, and it's just a real joy. And I'm not sure if you do Jerry Smith. Jerry Smith was a longtime lieutenant of the Westwood Fire Department. He just was promoted to fire chief, just not here. He was promoted to fire chief in Dover. So I like to say we're annexing Dover slowly but surely. So we're very happy for.
They're poaching all our people.
Yeah. We're very happy for Chief Smith and for Lieutenant Gingras, who was able to step into his role. I'll give it back to Rob.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit now about the upcoming financial status. And I'm going to ask Stephanie McManus to join us now, because this is really her bailiwick, and this is where her department is juggling, lots of things, closing out prior fiscal year and planning the next fiscal year while managing current fiscal year. So with that, I will toss the juggling balls to you.
Thanks, Rob. Hi, everyone. And I was going to introduce myself later, but I'll start now, I guess. So I'm the town's finance director, treasurer collector, Stephanie McManus, for those of you who I have not met. So a lot of this information we went over at the select board meeting September 29th, last Monday. So if you have any interest in diving deeper into any of this information, I did a long update to the board then. So this time of year, we always say we're in 3 fiscal years at once. We're closing out the books for FY25, so that's been completed. We had our audit report of that year, on-site audit done already. We have closed out expenditures and revenues. All good news, came in the surplus. Free cash, I'll go through this a little bit more, but was certified in early September at about $15.7 million, which is a great news. That's about $2 million over what we were certified at last year, and that's as of June 30th, 2025. Like I said, we have been having an on-site audit. The on-site portion of that is completed. We had an audit committee meeting. If anyone wants to come to those, we have them a couple of times a year. We just had one in September to go over sort of what the key highlights were for that audit. We have CBIZ, formerly Powers and Sullivan, come on site. There are third-party auditors. And then we have a 3-person committee, the audit committee of residents, who are wonderful. We're missing Susan. And they review that as impartial, independent reviewers. So that report will be due out in the next month or so. We'll have another audit committee meeting, and then that annual financial report will be submitted in December. I think it's been 22 years, consecutive years, that the town has received financial award for that, so that's a great thing, so we're hoping to do that again for FY25. We've completed the FY26 budget in the sense that that was all approved at town meeting. We're in the middle of 26 right now, everything's going smoothly. We're waiting for new growth to be certified. Hopefully that'll be done in the next couple of weeks. That kind of coincides with our tax rate setting process. We can't get our new growth until all of our values are submitted by our town assessor, so she's working through that process right now. November 17th, I think, don't quote me, is that it? Thank you. November 17th will be the select board meeting where our board of assessors and town assessor and myself will go in front of the select board to go through the tax rate setting process. That's when they approve the shift between the commercial and residential properties. And then we'll kick off the FY27 budget process. So we'll be in front of you a number of times over the next couple of months, starting that. Internally, we are just now receiving back capital requests from the individual departments and vetting those. So the capital book will be coming out in the next couple of weeks. And we are just now starting the operating budget process in the sense of requesting, sending out forms to departments and going through that. So I usually start presenting the 5-year capital improvement plan sometime in late November, early December to the board, and the operating budget comes a little bit later in December, early January. So that's all I have on my end.
A quick question. On the free cash, I assume that the 13 million has been relatively stable the last couple of years?
Go ahead.
No, it's a great question. I'll get into this a little bit more later, but the last 3 years we've really seen, it's usually been certified at about 6, 7, maybe 8 million.
Okay.
2 years ago, I think it was at 10. Last year was about 12 or 13. This year it's about 15.
If you think
So-
about that, Paul, part of the reason for that, when we had, a lot of the bond money in accounts for the school before we started paying bills on the school, it happened to coincide with some pretty hefty interest rates.
Yeah.
We've been the beneficiary of some pretty substantial income from the investment growth, conservative investment growth, but, high interest rates.
Our
So-
average rate right now is about 4.25
Right.
with our investment.
Okay.
Which
And
is
that
still
was
pretty
really
good.
my next question is what was the, if you look at the 2 million above what you anticipated,
Yeah.
which is whatever, 15, 20%, fairly significant. What was the cause on that? So,
A huge one has been investment income. So over the last 3 years, it wasn't as high this year, but, it used to be that investment income total per year would be $150,000-ish dollars. Last year, it was 2 million. Huge difference. So that's cash in the bank. That's starting out at a high free cash from the previous year, building on that, and then also just higher than anticipated revenues overall with excise tax income. We're seeing a lot of building permits. A lot of
Yep.
towns are seeing a huge reduction in people pulling building permits. Westwood's still steady, if not increasing. People are still adding on things to their homes and stuff like that. So those three main revenue sources came in higher than projected, which adds to that.
okay.
Nothing bad. It's a good thing. And then
No, yeah, I mean, it begs more questions, I think, down the road with, the level, but a good problem to have in many ways.
yeah.
So, as we look ahead in the calendar, there are some dates to be aware of. The schools will be continuing to talk about some of their master facilities plan information sessions. There's a little bit different in that they've got pretty uniform use, just different sized students in the buildings, so they can actually talk about some of those options in terms of where they think educationally they would want to prioritize things. And then they are also members of the Long Range Financial Planning Committee, which will be getting back together in November to start that conversation around how do we best reimagine, repurpose, and rethink the use of current buildings to solve many of the needs that we have identified through both sides of the studies there. So that's, the next few weeks and into November. Then will we be back with a budget presentation before you all on February 10th. Budget books will be out basically first of the month.
Yep, February 1st, the
February 1st.
operating budget's due out.
Yep. And then you have your two public hearings, February 24th, March 24th, and then we have annual town meeting on May 4th. So just some key information there. And, we encourage people. We had, nice turnout last night. It was good to see and good to hear as much discussion as we had. There are a lot of ways to stay abreast of what's going on. You can sign up for the town website, the Alert Westwood notifications via email. You'll get notifications of every public meeting agenda, so you can scan it, circle anything that you might be interested in. If it happens to be one of the big four, FinCom, Select Board, School Committee, or Planning Board, those are all recorded by Westwood Media Center. A little trick on how to get through that: if you watch it the next morning over coffee, you can kind of just hold your finger to the right on your phone and speed through at twice the speed. Cuts the meeting time in half. And Westwood Media Center does a great job of putting what was being talked about in the super, in the lower third. So another great way to, advance through things. You guys are a great example of what we talk about in terms of people willing to donate their time, their talent, and their thought to the community. And so thank you for that. We are always looking for new members of various boards and committees. We have openings on the Conservation Commission, the Ped Bike Advisory Committee, the Recreation Commission, the Cemetery Commission, the Commission on Disability, the Historical Commission, the Housing Partnership Fair Housing Committee, and the Westwood Cultural Council. Anyone interested in any of those things can email a resume and a statement of interest to bos@townhall.westwood.ma.us. So that concludes the state of the town. I think Stephanie has some more of the financial background for folks. But before I turn it over to Stephanie, any questions with respect to?
You mentioned grants, and last night I know Congressman Lynch was in attendance. We didn't get to hear from him, but I believe he may have said something about in passing, that there may be things that they can do to help depending on where the site is.
So and I touched on this as delicately as I could, or as directly as I could, as we led into each of the special elections. We have a great track record as a community of seeking out, finding, applying for, and receiving grant money at the federal and state level. Look no further than Pine Hill, where, roughly $90 million school, 60 million?
60.
Yeah, so, we certainly got a significant amount of help from the Fed and state level. And we will take that approach with everything, including, a new fire station. And there may be monies available, but you can't apply unless and until the community has approved the full boat of the project, the full price tag of the project. So, even if there was a $3 million number that might be available through the federal government, we couldn't say, well, we're going to approve 35 because it's not a guarantee, right? So it's the type of thing, yes, we will continue to always seek whatever money is available through whatever means is available. And that is true in every department. Molly and Stephanie can talk to how much money Todd Corchin goes out and finds, how much money the police chief and the fire chief go out and find. There is a ton of work that goes out to try and mitigate the impact on all of us as resident taxpayers. So
It just seemed to me that what I heard, and maybe I'm not, I'm hearing it secondhand, that depending on where we put it, there may be more money. So just I don't know if that's true.
Congressman Lynch's chief of staff and I had an exchange last night. She's absolutely willing to set up a meeting
Awesome.
with us to discuss whatever options once we have sort of narrowed our field. So,
And by the way, I thought it was a really good meeting, despite, I know some people mentioned that it wasn't well attended, well advertised. I thought it was really well attended. That's a big room, so it might not feel full, but I thought there were a lot of good discussion, a lot of different opinions heard, respectful for the most part. And I thought Danielle did a really great job moderating.
thank you. She did an outstanding job facilitating that whole conversation. So, and thank you for being there. Any other questions? All right, Stephanie.
Hey, Rob, sorry, not really a question, but just a comment, kind of building what Paula was saying, is the one thing that struck me yesterday at the meeting, though, was the number of people that were looking for more visibility of the documents, things like the facilities plan or the 5-year plan. And it's there, it's on the website. So that's the part that, I mean, it just felt like there were a lot of those concerns raised. But as I looked at it, they're there and available. I don't know if it's a matter of difficulty. I don't know, it's not that, I didn't find it that hard to find those documents if you go onto the website. But I know it was one of those things that just kept getting pushed, and then there becomes this halo of transparency, which I
Yep.
think is wrong, but.
I'll say that our website is dated and could be better, could be easier to find certain things for some folks. We have, when you put together the grand scheme of things that we're going to spend money on, coming to ask for money for a new website is kind of lower on that list, and I would expect it would be lower on a lot of your lists. But, understand that, yes, that information is there. We try to make it as easy to find with tiles right on the front page as best we can. So if there's anybody who has a suggestion on how to make something easier to find, provided it is something that can be done within the construct of the content management system of the site, I'm sure we would be open to hearing that. So
I think there was a good amount of, there's some misinformation out there, and it's very hard, I think, for the select board to say anything and not look defensive. But I thought, like, John Cummings getting up at the end of the meeting and saying, everyone who's saying, like, citizens aren't involved in this process isn't looking. I mean, you just had a beautiful list of opportunities. Look around this table. We're all volunteers doing this. So I think there's, people, someone said in the meeting last night, oh, the population isn't growing. And, which I had to say, that's not true, But I think there's a lot of things that get said and as if it's gospel, and it's not necessarily the truth. And I think it's good for the average folk to stand up and say that, at least bring your truth, because I know otherwise it looks like you're being defensive about it or something.
Well, and thank you for bringing that up. And those opportunities that we just showed in terms of openings are, just some of the ways you might be able to get involved. And I've actually said this to a couple of people. Westwood is no different than most communities, right? Where you've got a lot of people who lead incredibly busy lives. And so, if you ask somebody if they would like to be involved, they'd say, I'd love to, I just don't have the time, which is fine. But if you don't have the time to be involved, and you guys certainly are giving of your time, you also likely don't have the time to do the research. And so you're left as susceptible to outsourcing your opinion to somebody else to say, well, I heard, or someone told me. And so we try to make as much information as available as possible. We encourage you, if you hear something that you don't think sounds right, correct it on the spot. Say, let me look into that. Don't take that as gospel. And I think this group does a great job of vetting things, and we're trying to fight a broader wave of, you referred to as misinformation, which leads to mistrust. We're all neighbors. We're all paying the same taxes as everybody else, and we're trying to do the right thing by the entire community. So, if you can't be involved, find the information to make an informed decision, and if you don't have the information, ask a question. And if we're answering the question, it's not from a place of defensiveness. It's, I hope you trust that we have looked into it. And you guys have certainly asked tough questions of us. I hope we have always answered your questions with respect and, thoroughness as best we can. And we'll continue to do that. That's all we can do. So, again, thank you for everything that you do. And I'm going to now turn it over to Stephanie for the financial overview.
Are you gonna stay up here?
I'll stick with you, sure.
I can do the clicker. Yeah, I don't want to do that. Thanks. Okay. So I actually already touched on some of this, which is good. It's a lot of dense material in here. I will say I wanted this to be a reference guide for you all, so some of the slides I might just skip right over. I'll just say, like, here's a timeline. You'll see there's a lot of dates. I'm not going to walk through the dates. So my goal really is to get a foundation tonight on how municipal finance works specifically in Massachusetts, because I'm sure you're well aware we're very different than other states. What guides our financial policies and decisions in Westwood, and then where we currently stand as we head into the FY27 budget cycle. So here's just the agenda of what I'm going to go through tonight. Start with how municipal finance works, how the Department of Revenue regulates our local finances, the roles of both this committee here and the Select Board, go through our financial policies, do an overview of how the financial budget process works, timeline, things like that. Go through all of our revenue categories, which is an important piece to know as we walk into the budget, so that when I'm saying these terms, you're just not like looking at me like, what does that even mean? And then go into our different expenditure categories. And then finally, I'll end with debt. So for the foundation, what municipal finance actually involves and how it's structured specifically in Massachusetts. It is highly regulated, which is a good thing because it ensures consistency and accountability. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Making sure that
Yep.
the rest of the world can hear you.
I don't know if they want to. Each town's financial management covers areas such as budgeting, revenue collection, debt administration, investment management. Our fiscal year and most towns' fiscal years runs from July 1st to June 30th. We operate under the oversight of the Department of Revenue's Division of Local Services. They approve our tax rate, our property values, they certify free cash, and they regulate how we treat revenues and expenditures. For example, what requires town meeting vote authorization and what doesn't. Each year we undergo an independent audit, which I talked about already, with resulting in our annual comprehensive financial report, which is available on the town's website. So that one is up right now for FY24, and then FY25 will be up sometime in December or January. That's an important document. It's used by rating agencies. I actually have a ratings call coming up in November for some long-term debt we're issuing, so they'll be referencing that report when they look at our AAA bond rating, which I'm hoping we get reaffirmed. So we have a AAA bond rating from Standard & Poor's, which reflects our long-term financial strength. So in order to have strong financial management, there needs to be clear policies and consistent oversight and guidelines. So I'll just reference that we do have financial policies here in Westwood. They cover a lot of categories: reserves, capital planning, how we manage free cash, debt service, cash management, and our OPEB financing plan. We include a policy status report, or what I call a scorecard, in our annual budget documents. So our budget document, and then this eventually goes into the, thank you, the town meeting book as well. So people can see up-to-date numbers on how we're performing against our goals with all of these policies. I won't go through them, but those are also posted on the town's website.
I know it says it on the slide, but Mr. Breda pointed out that last night at our meeting, we threw around a lot of acronyms.
Oh, yeah.
And so for people's benefit,
That's
OPEB, when you hear us refer to OPEB, that's other post-employment benefits, okay? So,
That's benefits for retirees, everything other than pension, so health insurance, dental insurance, things like that. Thank you, Rob. So much of what I've talked about so far, including the financial policies, is ultimately overseen by the Select Board. So just taking a look at their role in financial management. They help shape budget priorities, they oversee the development and creation and presentation of the budget to the community, and they ensure that the budget reflects the town's goals and values. They open and close the town meeting warrant with all the articles. They also approve financial policies, oversee debt authorization and borrowing, and they are the only board that can vote to place a Prop 2.5, which I'll go over later, Proposition 2.5 override or debt exclusion on the ballot. In addition, they determine the tax classification or how the tax levy is distributed between residential and commercial properties. Do a lot. And then, so while the Select Board provides overall leadership, the Finance and Warrant Commission plays a crucial role, an independent role, in reviewing and recommending, especially leading up to town meeting. So the FinCom role includes reviewing the town's financials, approving reserve fund transfers, and conducting a detailed review of the annual budget. As you know, you're required to hold at least one public meeting on the budget, usually two, and produce an annual report that includes your recommendation on all warrant articles, known as I call it the town meeting warrant book. So just walking through how the town's annual budget process actually works. This is just a timeline. You can read through the individual things, but the budget, it's an important part of the continuing planning process. So first, as is going on right now, the capital budget is in early fall. Then we go into the operating budget in the winter. And each year, departments submit requests based on their current needs. So that's where those budgets are really driven from. Those requests are then presented to the select board. A budget is drafted, reviewed, and presented, and then also reviewed at FinCom and public meetings. So after community input, the budget then goes to town meeting for approval. So the select board proposes the annual budget, but town meeting is the body that ultimately approves it. And this is a continuous process, as we just went over. So as soon as 1 year closes, we're already beginning conversations on the next one. This is one I won't go through. It's just sort of throwing up there what we've done so far this year, what we have coming up, just giving you an overall timeline of the different areas and sort of when they happen so you can tune into different meetings if you're interested in one of these topics and categories. This is another one I will also not bore you by sitting through different dates. This is again, and this is specific to this fiscal year. So a lot of those dates, like you see the February 10th meeting, I'll be in front of you to present. These dates are specific to this budget cycle. We produce key financial documents, was what we were talking about, that are all posted on the town's website throughout the year, each for a specific purpose. So just going over those, the capital book, this is the 5-year capital needs, and our most recent debt schedules are included in that document. Our municipal budget detail book, the school department produces their own budget detail book, our overall budget summary, the town meeting warrant book, and then that, we call it the ACFR, but the annual comprehensive financial report I was discussing with the outside audit. So the financial articles voted at town meeting address all areas of the town's finances, including the operating budget, capital, funding of different liabilities and reserves, and then the budget developed must be comprehensive and balanced. You'll hear me talk a lot this year about a balanced budget, so it's important to go over what sources of revenue go into funding those different expense categories. So at the highest level, the town's budget is really funded by 4 main revenue categories: property taxes, state aid, local receipts, and free cash. So for most Massachusetts towns, including Westwood, property taxes make up the majority of our revenue. So the key challenge is that our largest revenue source is tightly restricted by Proposition 2.5. So we need to carefully plan within that framework each year.
Stephanie, on that last graph on the last page, the taxes, out of that 80%, what's commercial versus residential property taxes? Do you know? I know. You might not have it in front of you.
No, I do, and I.
So it's based.
Ballpark.
I was like, I just
I'm
did
just trying
this
to give
yesterday
people a
for
sense of like, all right.
It's based on, the overall assessed value across the entire community, and then what percentage falls as residential versus commercial.
Right.
So for this year, it was roughly 87% was residential, 13%, 12.9 was commercial
value, yeah.
value.
Yeah.
And if we just did a straight flat tax rate, 1-for-1, then we'd all be paying the same.
Right.
In November, Stephanie, Cheryl Hanley, our assessor, and the Board of Assessors will come and present to us, and we will then vote a tax shift where we can shift up to 1.75 from residential to commercial. So that changes that percentage from 87% down to 78%.
Okay.
So it takes a significant burden off the residential taxpayer, and, still keeps us competitive relative to other communities from a commercial standpoint. So that's the type of thing, when you have heard me in the past talk about, we need more commercial growth because that's the only relief valve that we have. That's what I'm referring to, because of that shift in the pie. So, and just for a point of reference, before University Station fully came online, we had fallen down to, let's call it 12.5% of our values were commercial values. When University Station got fully up online, it got up to just under 16%. So now we're back at where we were. We're sort of running to stay in place at this point, and it's trickling down. So we're almost back to that low point of 10 years ago. So it's.
What's causing that?
And it's not just, less commercial properties and more residential, but it's the values of the properties. So
Okay.
unfortunately, vacant commercial buildings, values are going down.
And, as I just talked about at the beginning, the state of our community is strong. We're a desirable community. Values have gone up. So in the year, I think it was fiscal '24, when Pine Hill first came on and started to hit the tax rolls, that year, residential values, assessed values increased 3 times faster than commercial values. That took that shift where the prior year it had been like 15% commercial, and now all of a sudden it's down to 12, right? That was the difference between what.
Because housing prices are going up, is that what you're saying?
Housing prices are going up. You heard Stephanie talk about the number of permits being pulled for renovations. Those improvements contribute to higher values as well. So all of those things are part of the mix of the pie when you start looking at slicing commercial versus residential.
Is there a minimum percentage commercial that the state will allow us to split?
I wish I knew the answer to that, right, Stephanie?
I know, and I don't even know if it's allow us, it's honestly, at some point, it becomes just not even necessary anymore, if that makes, it gets to the point of it, because you can only shift so much each time.
Right.
For example, the year that it fell, when that 3-to-1 sort of comparison shift happened, we upped our tax shift to 1.72 that year. But that couldn't keep pace with the loss in percentage that was.
Arithmetic doesn't keep up.
The math doesn't math, Chris.
So to reframe Bill's question, on this slide, show us the section in the future, not now.
Okay.
In the future, show us the section of that blue pie.
It's commercial and
that's
residential?
Yeah, so break
Absolutely.
it. Residential, commercial. That's, yeah, you did a better
And
job of
we
saying.
do this in much more detail at that November 17th hearing. It's like a whole half hour on property values and the shift and all that. So, but I can take that and bring this to that group, to this group next time. Thank you for
Rob, I
that.
know that on long-term, when I served on long-term, we were always researching what other towns are doing and trying to steal ways that we can creatively.
Or revenue, yeah.
Get some revenue. How is that going? Has there been any movement? Is there a town out there with the secret sauce that?
If there was a secret sauce, there would be a line out the door to buy it. There's not really a secret sauce, and as Stephanie said, for residential communities like ours, and there's a lot of them in Massachusetts, property tax is the lion's share of their revenue source.
Unfortunately, it's going the other way, where you're seeing a lot of operational overrides in communities. It's actually less revenue, and they're just trying to maintain the budget they have.
So all those calls I made to all those towns didn't
No.
answer. We
That's-
try.
It's helpful, though. It's good to research and always be looking out for new fees you can implement, or, yeah.
And we'll let Stephanie get to, this is the revenue side, she's about to get to the expense side.
A lot of us predicted, when Prop 2.5 went into place 45 years ago, there are a lot of people who predicted that towns would basically run out of the ability to keep up. Westwood has done a fantastic job. We're 45 years in, and we're still with not having to do an operational.
I think it was 2002 was the last one, somewhere around there.
Maybe 7.
I don't remember, sorry.
Somewhere.
Maybe 2007.
Yeah.
It's been 20 years, we'll say.
Okay.
But there are communities that actually build it into sort of every 5 years.
Yeah. I thought that we did one for Pine Hill.
Operational override, so that's a permanent increase to the levy to fund the operating budget.
Not a debt exclusion.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, but thank you, George. That's actually a really important
Great
thing.
segue, by the way.
Let's definitely do her
Thank me
thing.
later, Stephanie.
My least favorite
Right ahead.
topic to talk about. It's really dense topic, but I'm going to try to run through this. What I really want to do is leave questions for the end. That's really what I'm here for, to answer questions. So in simple terms, Prop 2.5 is a law unique to Massachusetts, which limits how much total property tax levy a community can raise from year to year. So this total, called levy, is calculated through a formula-based process, It starts with the prior year's levy limit as the base, then you add 2.5% increase to that, which is the limit that's allowed under Prop 2.5. Then you estimate new growth. So this time in the budget, you'll see me in December and January coming in with an estimated new growth number for the FY27 budget, because as I just mentioned, our FY26 number hasn't even been certified until next month. So we conservatively budget for what we think we'll see in new growth, so that when, you know, we would never fall short of that number, because it would be a problem. You'd be mid budget cycle. If your new growth didn't hit what your estimates were, you're in trouble. So this time of year, we estimate new growth, then any exempt debt payments for that year. Proposition 2.5 does allow overrides. A community can assess in excess of the available 2.5% levy increase by passing an override. So debt exclusions and operational overrides enable a community to either permanently increase the levy limit, which is the override, or temporarily levy above its levy limit, which is the debt exclusion, all upon voter approval at an election. These two things are used for different purposes. You can see up there more information on that. It's important to note, though, that Prop 2.5 controls, I say this a lot, the total taxes a town can raise, so it does not apply to an individual tax bill. Those can still vary, change on property values, as Rob just touched on. So this is just more of a tangible way of explaining that. So here's a calculation of the levy limit, how it works from when we were doing the FY26 budget. So the red circles are the important ones. So you start with it's a historical number, so it's based on the prior year's levy limit. You start there, you add the 2.5%, you estimate new growth at this point, and then you add any exempt debt. So the number for FY26 you can see up there is at $4 million, which includes the Pine Hill and the library debt. And then that comes to what we could tax, the levy, and then what we do tax. And anything that we do not tax to below that, or anything that comes in new growth over what we estimate, is called the unused tax levy. So Westwood often in the past has not taxed to the max levy. We try to whenever possible, just to leave that unused levy capacity, number one, for the taxpayers, because that's obviously less we tax on you, and number two, just to be able to have that capacity building so that if you ever needed it, you could tap into it.
Stephanie, sorry, could you just
Yeah.
really quickly explain how you calculate the new growth?
So estimate, that's exactly what it is. You sort of just look at where we've been the last couple of years. I check in with our town assessor to see how she kind of forecasts, do we see new commercial development coming into the town? How are the building permits being pulled? Are people still developing in their house? If it's, it looks like the trends are dipping too low, we reduce it. It's been somewhere, as you can see, so the actual new growth number in 25 was around 930,000, and in FY24 is about 730. So the 700 range is where we've been the last couple of years. It was higher in those years that we had university station growth. So we've been budgeting the last couple of years around $550,000.
Yeah, if you took that back probably to 18, that new growth number, when you get to the actual new growth number, has been declining as University Station has built out and there's less new growth coming online.
Is there anything new coming?
There is the Homes 2.
Yep, that's true.
Homes 2 is coming. And then really the last parcel is the one that Dana-Farber now has. And we're waiting for them to begin. They've got to go through their determination of need process with the state, things like that. So there is some time yet on that one.
Stephanie, when does the new growth, when are you allowed to call the new growth added? When the project's completed or when it starts?
Oh, that's getting into, I wish Cheryl was here. It's all based on a January 1 date, I know that, so there are very specific dates for when that cutoff is. I don't know that off the top of my head.
So it's not necessarily when the occupancy permit is issued?
There is usually completion dates, so you can assess based on the completion date, but again, I don't know that off the top of my head, I apologize.
Thank you.
a lot more complicated than I thought.
Well, and that's partially why the new building permits is part of
Yeah.
what Cheryl's looking at.
Sure.
So Prop 2.5 limits the amount, like I said, a town can increase overall, but it doesn't apply to individual tax bills. I created this to kind of try to walk through how each tax bill is affected by the change in specific property values and the change in the tax rate. So once town meeting approves a budget, then the total number of that budget is divided by the total assessed value of the property in town to determine the tax rate. That's a little bit different here because we have the split, so the shift changes that rate a little bit. But that's generally how we come out to it. And then the tax rate distributes the total approved budget among all property owners based on value, so it doesn't generate new money. Even if property values rise, the total amount we raise is still capped by that Prop 2.5 and set by the budget. So other major revenue sources we have. Each year, the state provides state aid to every city and town. The two main categories are Chapter 70 education aid and then general municipal aid, which comes primarily from state lottery proceeds. We also are assessed to certain charges, which are factored into the budget. The governor's budget proposal usually comes out late January, which gives us an early look at expected aid, but the final numbers aren't confirmed until the state budget is finalized, which is funny, usually in July. So once our budget cycle has already actually begun. So we plan conservatively to avoid any surprises that might come up, but state aid has been steady over the years in Westwood. We've been able to at least count on about a 2.5–3% increase in that. We did have 1 year, you'll see it here in the chart, from FY23 to FY24, there was a large jump. That was the first year the governor came into office, I believe. So a smaller and more volatile source of revenue for us is local receipts. These are locally generated revenues other than property taxes. So things like motor vehicle excise tax, departmental fees, permits, licenses, user charges, investment income. So this is really what comes into play when we say how we certified our free cash. This is one of those revenue sources that typically comes in higher than we budget. We do that on purpose. We can conservatively budget these. Especially the motor vehicle excise is the largest category here, but that can fluctuate each year based on vehicle sales and market activity. So that's the reason that we conservatively budget these assumptions for this category. That approach often results in positive variances at year end, which contribute to our free cash number certification. Speaking of free cash, so that's one of the most frequently asked about terms in municipal finance, so I'm going to try to clarify what it means. Free cash is a Massachusetts-specific term. It's essentially the town's retained earnings. It represents unspent funds from prior years and any revenue surplus, and then also expenditures not used. So the DOR, the Department of Revenue, certifies free cash amount for each community each year, after the town accountant closes the books and submits the balance sheet. So we use free cash for one-time expenses such as capital projects, special articles, or snow and ice deficits. I apologize, this is not up to date, but I can say it now that at the September 29th meeting, I presented that the Department of Revenue certified free cash of July 1, 2025 at about $15.7 million. And just per our financial policies, you'll see the green boxes up there. The green boxes are what we're projecting we'll use in the budget. The blue is what it was certified at. And then per our financial policies, we like to keep a balance of about 4% of what we call the net general fund revenue. So right now, that number is about 4.3 million. So we're well above our target.
And so what do we use, for example, the last year or two where you've got such a surplus there? What is that then used for if you're limited in terms of operational budget? How does that come into play?
So we don't use free cash to fund our ongoing operating budget
Right.
expenses. It's not something we typically do. So what we use it for mainly is our base capital articles. So we have a base municipal and a base school capital article, which comes to about $2.9 million or so that we invest in each year. So that's replacement of vehicles, small projects, annual, restocking of IT equipment, things like that. And then we have used it historically also for one-time larger separate capital expenses or projects that might come up.
And who, does that come before us? Like, what's the threshold of what gets approved? Is there a certain, line item by line item that we say, okay, we approved it, pencils? Or, or is it just vehicle, like,
You mean in the capital budget in particular?
in the free cash? Does that come to us, or is it?
So when you,
Do you mean how free cash gets certified or how we spend it?
How you spend it, does that?
Spend it.
Yeah.
So you'll see when we come in front of you over the next couple of months and we have specific articles that we're drafting, you'll see, Article 8, additional capital, and it'll list, say, 3, 4, 5 projects, whatever it is. And free cash will be a funding source.
Oh, okay, it's the book we see, okay.
Yep.
I
No,
see.
that's a great question.
If
So-
this is my first
No, it's
year,
this,
so.
this is what I wanted. So, any article that we present to you, and especially the operating budget, you'll see over the side, everything has to list the exact funding source and the
Okay.
amount. Yeah.
Stephanie, now that this has, obviously, like, it's continued to escalate, and it's now at a point where it's, 3 times higher than it has been historically, and it's 3 times higher than what we anticipate we're gonna even need. At some point, I know we haven't historically, but do we, at some point, like, reduce that and try to find, because even if we were to take 10 million out, like, we still, that $5 million budget includes what we've projected plus an additional, right? So there's already some fluff built into that. So I'm wondering, like, if there's a better use of capital, or if we're able to, like, use that. I know we haven't had that opportunity in years past, but now that it's kind of continued to escalate.
No,
is
this
that
is a
something
great
you're
question,
thinking about?
and we try to address this, so this is exactly what we'll be talking about in front of the select board over the next couple of months, strategies for how we want to spend this. On the projection side, because as you can see, the 2 main drivers of this really are available funds for the prior year and then actual revenue higher than we budgeted, right? So I think between the last 2 budget cycles, local receipts estimates that we project out, we've increased about $1 million. So we are on the projection side trying to reevaluate where we actually stand with what we're bringing in, so keeping up on that side. And then great timing, because in the last couple of years, we have had in the back of the mind that this master facility plan was coming out, and it was going to show a lot of needs with different buildings. So just anticipating that this could be a funding source for some of those, low-hanging fruit projects that might come out of that plan.
Awesome.
And I think you were saying that at the beginning. Are you also, when you think about that, are you thinking about also the cost of not having the compounding interest? Because once you spend it, it's gone, right? Versus when you hold on to it, it's going to grow exponentially. So it's growing, as you can see, up, up, up. And I think if you were to project this out, if you were to hold on to this cash, it's going to,
Which is absolutely true, yes.
Which I know it's not an easy decision, is right, is spending on the town versus like continue that exponential growth. But I'm sure you're weighing the pros and cons of each side.
Mm-hmm, yes.
So when you're talking about the free cash, and I see like snow and ice, so we don't get a lot of snow, but we budgeted for it, so I assume that's,
you do remember 2015, yes?
I remember it all.
It's funny because last year, we barely had any snow. We had to request additional funding for our snow and ice budget because it was in deficit because of salting, because of all the ice.
Yeah.
We actually usually overspend our snow and ice budget, which is the only account that we are allowed to overspend. We just usually ask for a transfer through Article 1 at town meeting for that.
So what are the sorts of things though that we aren't spending on? Is it like salaries that we weren't able to fill positions? Is it not replacing car? Like, why are we seeing $10 million that we didn't count on?
So on the expense side, the budget side, turnbacks. So turnbacks do go into this. The operating budget is unique in the sense that at the end of the year, come June 30th, and we talk about closing out the books, this is part of the process, we can't roll that money over. So whatever was funded in that operating budget for that year that goes unspent closes out to free cash. It's usually our fixed cost budget, which is a big one. Not as many people signed up for health insurance that year as we anticipated. Trying to think of other larger categories there. And that's a big one that closes out. And I went through this at the select board meeting, so I'm trying to remember the percentages. On the school budget side, I think they closed out 0.5% of their budget.
Right.
And on the municipal budget side, it was a couple,
close to
2 or
2,
3%. So those budgets are very tight. We don't, the salary ones, we don't
Yeah.
see a lot. Usually the only time we do is if there's a long vacancy.
Right.
For some reason, I'm trying to think of a position we've had open that took a while to fill. A department head say that we didn't fill for 6 months, took a while, so that might just turn back
Just,
some
you look at it and you
salary.
say, wow, where are you finding 10 million?
Well,
So the big-
biggest,
the-
the biggest driver of that, though, was the amount of money we had available.
Yes.
Sitting in accounts, earning
Right.
strong
Interest
interest
rate,
rates,
okay.
right? So,
It was the time period where we borrowed $60 million for the Pine Hill School. That obviously wasn't all spent at once, it was spent over a
Right,
number
right.
of years. So while that large bucket of money was sitting cash in the bank, happened to be the first year that rates were really good.
Right, yeah, and you said you got 2
So,
million.
and it's just been kind of compounding. I'm sure you're all seen the Fed cut a quarter point. They expect to do 2 more quarter points this year. I don't anticipate, which is good for when we go to borrow eventually.
Yeah.
But I don't see the investment income rates staying the way they are.
Yeah.
But,
It's also underestimating things like the new growth and the receivables and the excise tax and all those things that just compound over time, so.
and you weigh the pros and cons, as you just said, so we definitely budget conservatively in this town. It's just a procedure that we do as part of our financial policies. With that, we get to build our reserves, but that also means we budget conservatively on our operating budget, and we're not adding positions left and right and doing things like that, so.
and it also means that, when you look at when COVID hit, when the pandemic hit, towns that had their hotels and meals tax built into their base operating budget, all of a sudden, when that dries up, you don't have any choice but to let people go, right? We didn't have to do that because we used that money for one-time capital expenditures. So, conservatively budgeting new growth, same type of thing. We don't want to get into a situation where, we got a little aggressive, and now we don't have money to pay for people.
I'll fly through the last couple of slides.
One last question.
Yeah.
And appreciate being conservative on that, how we budget those things, but is there like there's various state laws that govern lots of this stuff. Is there any max limit, dollar amount or percentage-wise, that certified free cash for a town should not go above?
Yeah.
No, I don't think there is. I don't know why this just popped in my mind, but I think Wellesley just renovated their entire town hall with all free cash. So there are communities out there that are even higher than this.
But I actually thought that Mass as a state had a limit for
I don't
that.
want to say no for sure because I don't want to, I can definitely research that. I don't know off the top of my head. I will say, if it got too high, especially year over year, like one year to the next, our DOR rep that we work with when we're certifying free cash will reach out with questions.
Okay.
So it's the definite checks
Yeah,
and balances.
yeah.
I think I don't know if it's an exact number, but it's more your trends and what's flowing into this. Yep. Okay. So on the expense side, there's 4 main categories there as well. The operating budget, which I will refer to as Appendix D in the town meeting book. It's because it's called Appendix D. So when we go to vote at town meeting and we go page by page, that's the large operating budget. That includes fixed costs and reserves. That's also part of Appendix D. Then the capital budget, which is the different capital articles. And then debt, which is the principal and interest debt service payments in that year. And this chart just sort of shows a breakdown of that, and obviously the largest piece is the school and municipal operating budget. So the largest area, operating budget, funds the annual costs of providing services across municipal departments, the schools, and shared fixed costs, such as benefits, and then also debt payments. The largest portion is salaries. Since we are a service organization, our people deliver the programs and services that residents rely on every day. Long-term, our goal is to maintain stability without having any large swings in funding in this budget in particular. In addition to those operating costs, we also have town-wide expenses that we include in the fixed cost piece just because they don't fit into any individual department. These accounts include pension, health insurance, unemployment, workers' compensation. They cover any obligation that we're required to fund each year. This budget is increasing. It's currently approximately 20% of our total budget.
Stephanie, sorry, just comment on In Norfolk County.
Yeah, sure. So, and we're actually in the middle of this right now again, but this time last year, Norfolk, we are part of, let me back up a little bit. We are part of the Norfolk County retirement system. Some communities have their own retirement system. We are part of a larger one with a number of other communities in Norfolk County. And that retirement board, every other year, just like we do with our OPEB account, does a valuation report with an outside actuary. So last year, they hired a new actuarial firm. They had had the previous one for a number of years. That firm implemented a number of assumption changes. They completely changed their mortality tables, what their estimates are for how long people are living, salary projections for public safety, all at once. So there was a large increase throughout all of the communities for their assessment. So they come up with a large number, you know, whatever that is, for what the pension system says they have to put into the system for that year, and then they assess all the communities based on those projections. They had also gone from a payroll-based method to an actuarial-based method, which really changed things a lot. So a lot of communities were seeing, or they had been seeing in the past couple years, 2 to 3% increases year over year for the pension assessment, was going up to 15 to 20% in 1 year, which when you have an $8-9 million assessment, huge numbers. So last year, we did, I think our increase was 8 or 9%. So, and I was in front of you, as many of you remember, we had to fund part of that with free cash, which is something we don't usually do because it was a large increase in 1 year that we just could not take the hit on, and a lot of communities were doing similar things. So we pushed back hard, and we are asking them to do another valuation. So for a second year in a row, they're doing a valuation, which they're going through right now. We have really pushed to have the funded by date pushed out. They currently have it at FY30, I think it is, which is 10 years prior to when PARAC, thank you, another acronym. The state PARAC is requiring towns to have the unfunded liability piece funded. So we're asking them to push it out or give projections 2-3 years and see how that might spread the cost out, because right now they're doing a projection again of a 9 to 10% increase for all communities.
That's for pensions, not for.
Retirement, yeah.
Okay.
Not for what? I'm sorry.
OPEB.
No, not for OPEB. We invest here. We have an actuarial firm, but we have more control over. If it comes back and they're projecting that what we put in annually would have to spike 20%, I would say, okay, we need to look at the funded by date and push that out.
Okay.
Or we need to change some assumptions. We have more control. In this case, it's a board, and there's no real control over it except for communities giving their opinions on what they would like to see happen.
Now, Joe has set up Stephanie to take credit for something, but she's too humble to do that. Around this time last year, that percent increase that was being estimated was going to be roughly, if my memory serves, 14% that we were going to get hit with. Stephanie caught an error in the way something was being calculated, pushed back on it, and that ended up resulting in the 8% that we had to end up, realizing. So, she's not just keeping an eye on our numbers here in town, she's keeping an eye on everybody's math, so.
Thank you, Rob.
I would also add that the board runs in fear when Stephanie comes to their meetings. She's quite vocal we have great collaborative relationships with other communities in Norfolk County, Sharon being one, Franklin being another. And Stephanie and Fred Turkington, who's a good friend of Sharon, are definitely the loudest voices in making sure that this pushes forward. So we're very grateful for her for that.
Thank you.
So Stephanie, this is a one-time cost?
No, so we have a pension assessment every year until that unfunded liability piece goes away, and that portion of it will drop down dramatically from, say, 8-9 million, which we have right now, to more like 2 million, which will be great one day. But it's a cost every year, and they do evaluation every other year. So every other year, we don't know 3 years out from now what our assessment's going to be. We only know 1 year out from now.
So they were sort of fixing, leveling it out because they weren't assuming people would live as long as they have, and they hadn't.
They changed all their assumptions.
Yeah.
Sorry,
How does it
finish your
affect-
question though.
how does it affect, every town have the same burden, or is it town by town based upon what they've already identified?
So that's the approach. They went from a payroll-based approach method for that to actuarial-based. So each town gets assessed individually based on what their liability is. I saw another hand
Is
there.
management of the Norfolk County retirement system part
Oh,
of
it's a
the
5-person board. That's the management.
management of the system? Is that part of what our Norfolk County assessment pays for?
Yes. Yes, I think the
You
answer
know
is
how
yes.
much that is?
The piece that goes to the administrative, I don't know.
And so I think the follow-up question to that is, would it be better for us to do our own pension system?
We've talked about this, because there are just, I'm thinking of neighboring communities. Wellesley has their own, Needham, Norwood. We've talked about it. It would mean implementing a whole new department with bodies and costs. So it's hard and, to pull out.
No free lunch, huh?
Yeah, we've talked about it. It's something we look at.
Okay.
Again, cost-benefit analysis on that as well.
And before you leave this slide, the other thing I just want to highlight is, where it says fixed costs are approximately 20% of this budget, right? Well, when your fixed costs, and a big part of this is your health insurance, when you think about health insurance premiums and what those are increasing, you just think about $100 million operating budget, just for round numbers. And if fixed costs are 20% of that, and, well, okay, there's $20 million of your $100 million operating budget. Well, if all of a sudden you get a 10% increase in healthcare costs, Prop 2.5 only allowing you to raise the levy by 2.5%, there's a whole bunch of that 2.5% that's spoken for. So when we talk about, the healthcare costs and the pressure that puts on the rest of the operating budget, that just sort of is meant to illustrate and bring that to light for everybody.
So, because I was going to go to health insurance, because they're going to go up 10 to 12%.
Yeah.
So what's the GIC
I thought my
doing?
doomsday was last year in front of you, but I think it's going to be very similar this
It's
year.
not going to get any better for a
I was
little
at a
while,
meeting
sorry.
last week or 2 weeks ago with head of the GIC, head of MIIA, which is
Yep,
the
Maya, yep.
literature, and Blue Cross. And I sit up at their panel and we go through all the data and it's not good, not good, not good. They get up to, have this panel and they said at the beginning, we have no good news, there is no solution, this is a nationwide problem, we have no fix. So we're like, okay. Starting from there, it's gonna be a long arc to make these kinds of major changes. Some other quotes they said was, we can't plan, design our way, let plan, design, change our way out of this problem, right? So the GIC has done different things, creating limited network plans, or you see high deductible plans. The cost specifically in pharmaceuticals has just gotten so high that they are projecting, again, double-digit increases. I can touch on something we implemented last year, something called the health insurance opt-out program. So it's an incentive program to get employees off of our health insurance. So we pay them a stipend, a couple of $1,000s, but we don't pay the $20,000 health insurance payment. So in year one, that reaped about $150,000,
Yep.
give or take. So we're looking at different solutions with that and a $20 million budget. That's not,
And that's town and school
that
employees.
is town employees. Thank you.
Yeah.
So they would go on a spouse's insurance because everybody has to have insurance.
Which is not solving the problem. It's just solving a little
It's
bit
moving
of
the problem.
Just, moving, giving it to somebody else, I get it.
Hot potato.
I'm gonna try. I swear, there's only like 2 slides left.
We're
I'll wrap
asking a
this
lot of
up.
questions.
No, the questions is what I want to get to, so I'm gonna fly through the last 2 or 3 slides. So beyond operating our capital budget, plans for long-term investments to maintain our town's infrastructure. Like I said earlier, we typically have a base school and a base municipal capital article targeting. Right now, that target's around 2.9 million. We're currently budgeting at about 2.6 million, so that's one of those areas I'll evaluate throughout the budget process. Free cash has been higher this year. Do we bump that base up again? For a second year in a row, to about 3 million or so. It's important to invest consistently each year, and delaying work leads to higher costs, as I'm sure you're all aware. So some of those larger capital projects or pieces of equipment are funded through borrowing, which brings me to my final major expenditure category, debt. So I won't walk through this in too much detail. It's kind of there just for your edification if you ever want to look at it. But town meeting has to authorize borrowing funds. State law governs what we can borrow for. There's a whole list of approvals that need to happen. So the town issues bonds. We have a triple credit rating, so we do get the lowest possible interest rates. The town treasurer conducts a public bond sale. So that will be happening in November. So if you want to see how this process works, at the November, I think, 17th meeting, the board will be approving a bond sale that's coming up for long-term debt. And then the principal and interest payments get included each year in the budget for those individual bonds. And I say bonds, but towns can either issue short-term debt as well, which is called a bond anticipation note or a BAN, or long-term bonds for permanent financing. Repayment of the debt service is through general fund revenue. So some of our debt is exempt from Proposition 2.5, meaning that is approved as a debt exclusion, which I've gone through, where we pay through a temporary tax increase that ends once the project's paid off. And then the other debt is non-exempt, meaning it's paid within the town's regular operating budget. So our goal is to time new debt whenever possible, so it replaces old debt as it's retired, which means we can keep payments steady year over year.
And as part of that process, you also look at periodically refinancing if rates
Yes.
warrant.
Yeah, that's true. The town has utilized that a number of times over the years, saving money when they can. And then this is just resources for you to look at if you're really interested in municipal finance. So just overall, as Rob stated earlier, Westwood's financial foundation is strong, guided by clear practices, policies, benefit from oversight, and participation from boards like this one. So I'll stop here mainly because I really do want to get to questions if there are any, but thank you so much for letting me go through that all.
Stephanie, on your slide about the state aid,
Yep.
and it sort of showed the pie, how do we talked about that 80%, and that seems to be kind of typical with other towns, but what about the other sort of the smaller slice there, that 20% state aid and some of the other pieces? How does that compare to other towns around us or throughout the state, just in terms of like opportunities to grow that portion to sort of?
Say that one more time, I apologize, I didn't hear what picture.
You had a slide, it had like the pie, I think you just passed it, and it showed like 80% of our
Revenue is the taxation, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and
Yep.
so the rest of the pie, like
Yes.
how does that, so you talked about like the
State aid.
taxes, 80%, that seems to be typical, but then within that like 20% balance, is that aligned with other towns?
Yeah, so state aid is pretty on track. We have no control over what we're allocated state aid. Like I said, it's at least good that it's pretty steady year over year. Any increase we get is usually about the same percentage increase that other communities get. The sewer enterprise fund, I don't touch on that often. It's it's its own beast. I could present a whole presentation on that. That is, so our sewer department is fully funded by sewer rates, so revenue that comes in there, it's an enterprise fund, it funds itself.
Not expensive.
That increase in revenue would only come from increasing rates, which the sewer commission does look at every year, and we have a consultant come in and help with that now, so we do look at that. Local receipts, like I said, that's actual revenue that comes in, that's all based on market activity, and then free cash is that amount, so. There's no real control over increasing those sources unless you come up with a new tax or a new fee assessment or new growth.
They're generally less dependent on state aid than a lot of other communities in the Commonwealth as well.
Do we get any of the hotel tax money?
Yep, so the town, 2017, I believe, is when the town did a local adoption of the meals and hotel tax.
Where do
So
we see that? In there?
That's,
The yellow?
yeah, available funds. I should break that out. I do have a whole, I think our balance right now in the meals and hotel tax is about 1.8 million. We use that at town meeting as well to fund capital articles. So we did I think it's a additional 0.75% on the, I'm gonna get this wrong, on the meals tax,
yeah.
and then a 6% on the hotel tax. So we collect that revenue from local businesses, and it goes into a separate account, separate from taxation, as Rob was stating earlier.
Yeah, and Stephanie showed you sort of a 5 10-year history, well, I guess.
I did this to the board last Monday.
The 8 or
so-
9-year history of since
Yeah.
we've adopted it, right? You would see some significant variations because of COVID. Obviously, there
Yeah.
was nobody in hotels or.
I will say this past year has been, the four past quarters have been our best so far. In the 8 years it's been implemented, so.
Thank you, Stephanie.
So one question
you all.
from, because this comes up from the group a lot from a capital perspective, right? You have the school feasibility study, you have the town building study. When are you guys gonna have one study that gives us a 10 to 15-year view of the potential capital projects, you know, that we'll need to explore, you know, a longer-term view, right? Because we're in the state we're in with needing all this stuff, because we didn't probably take a long enough view to some of it.
Well, so one of the things that we did early on in the Long-Range Capital Planning Committee was had Stephanie take a look at, okay, if you just forecast a conservative I think we did a 3% growth rate of the tax rate, or the tax base, right? And what our sort of space is under what our
For debt capacity.
debt
Right,
capacity
that's what it
was. And then you start to think about when things are starting to roll off and how that affects the space under our capacity. You know, that's sort of the long-term view that I think we went out to like, did we go out to 45?
I think so.
We went out to 2045.
That was in November last year, I think I gave that
Yeah.
presentation.
And so, you know, that will be sort of a foundational piece that we are talking about as we now look at the needs and figure out, okay, how do we address as many of the needs that are identified through these two studies in as creative a way as possible to make sure that we can address as many as we can while trying to mitigate the impact on the taxpayer, recognizing that we're going to need to renovate, so there will be cost. There's not there. You said it before, no free lunch, right? So there's going to be expenses. Whether those expenses are just spending significant money on, you know, renovating or, you know, replacing things in existing buildings for their existing use, reimagining those uses to be able to address some of those needs in a creative way that frees up other space, or building new. Those are the types of conversations that we're going to need to have. And then the other side of, you know, that's all on the expense side.
Right.
The other piece that we really need to be continuing to talk about is what I talked about earlier on the commercial side is we need more commercial growth. We only have 6% of our land that is zoned for commercial growth, or for commercial at all, right? So if you were to, you know, when we redid Islington Center, there was already a fair bit of commercial there. Yes, we've realized some net gain on it, but we also added, you know, a significant amount of residential between the homes at 45 and other things. So we're sort of running in place.
Yeah.
We're going to need to find, there isn't a whole big tract of land the way there was for University Station. We're going to need to find other opportunities to grow our commercial tax base. Now, there's going to be people who say, you know what, that's not what I want for this community. I want the town that I either grew up in or I moved to, and I don't want to see any additional commercial growth. And that's a perfectly fine answer. Just understand, that means you as the resident are going to pay for it. We as the residents are going to pay for it.
Some people don't want additional residential growth either. That grew up in the town.
That is true. That is true. Heard that the other night.
Sure you did.
Yep.
And I know Molly has talked about this, sorry, please, but we don't want, a lot of communities do these big plans, and they say, because, oh yeah, every 10 years we do a plan, and then the book comes and it sits on a shelf. I know that the board has committed to, this is really the time where we can kick it off and have community outreach on what we want to do moving forward, meet with Long Range, and make it so that that's not just another book on the shelf, so that we really implement a plan based on the good data that we got.
These are the hard conversations, right? I mean, this is, most of these buildings, I think of there's 17 municipal buildings between the schools and the municipal side. More than half of them are older than most of us in this room. you know? I mean, so,
Oh, most.
As I said last night, Rob, I'm as old as a lot of these buildings.
that's right, and, you know.
And so are you.
And these are intensive use buildings too, right? I mean, for those of you with kids, you know how much they can, you know, damage your home, right? Now put a whole bunch of them in a building, right? So there's a lot, though, the state of the buildings is not due to neglect, right? You see that we put a significant amount of money aside to maintain our capital assets. This is a function of time. And there's a lot of these buildings that are sort of all coming due around the same time. We know we don't have enough resource to address all of them, build them all new. Just can't do it. So now we have to have the hard conversation about, so how do we best accomplish what we need to accomplish in the most fiscally responsible way? And the one thing I can guarantee, we're never going to get everybody unanimous around the table to say that, yeah, that's the way we should go. There's always going to be somebody who's unhappy with whatever the solution is.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I didn't
One
see
more
your hand
question.
over
So Rob, earlier you mentioned kind of the concept of, misinformation around costs or capital projects, or maybe people not having enough time to kind of make decisions and be informed in terms of what's going on in some of these meetings. When I think about a capital project, you kind of have, your benefits of doing the capital project for the town versus like the costs associated with it. From your perspective, like where is the misinformation? Is it just like differing opinions on the benefits to the town, or is it like literally wrong facts being spewed from like a cost perspective?
I don't want to get into a whole bunch of, he said, she said on things, but there are sometimes comparisons that get made to other communities that don't take into consideration the use, that don't take into consideration the date at which it was built and what that inflationary cost might look like today. So there are things like that that sometimes get put forward that,
Yeah, no,
that skew perspective.
Sure. No, I mean, because misinformation, it's usually to differing opinions or, to your point, cherry-picked data, right? Data points that everybody just wants to hear in their own mind. I know just from a cost perspective, that's probably like a heavy concern on just the people in the town. And if, you could think about all those 8 different options that you gave people yesterday, right? I'm sure there's different benefits, right, to the town for each of those 8 projects and differing costs, right, for each of those 8 projects. I think just, you can have misinformation as it relates to the benefits of the town. I think you can minimize misinformation for the cost for the town by just giving as many facts as you can to the town. And I think you have done that, but maybe, try to think about it in terms of like a report card for like each of the different projects, because each of them are going to have different pros and cons in terms of costs. And I think we've been talking about them qualitatively, but I think when they're presented to us or to the town, if there could be some just very granular, objective metrics from a cost, because you're always going to have misinformation from a benefits perspective, but from a cost perspective, I think you can really minimize the noise and the chatter by just providing raw, hard data.
Yes, but there's also a cost to doing so, right? Chris and I were having this very conversation prior to the start of this meeting as we were debriefing on last night and what his thoughts were. So when you're looking at those 8 options, we can't go to design bid level cost, right, where we have cost certainty on anything, because you have to go through literally all the architectural and engineering planning to get to that level of specificity. We can get ballparks of what those rough order of magnitudes might be, right? So we can talk about the benefits, we can talk about the costs comparatively speaking, but to be able to get to sort of cost certainty on things, for people to be able to say, oh yeah, that's the answer, we're going to have to make choices on which do we think is the best path forward based on what we have informationally today. And so when you're looking at, one of the options was, well, we could put together a public safety campus where town hall is, and presuming that the schools turn over Deerfield custody control back to the select board. We could renovate Deerfield to become town hall, right? Those are additional dominoes that change the total cost of the project, right? So you're not gonna do that for $38 million, but that is a viable solution. But until we say, well, yeah, that relatively speaking makes sense, we're not gonna go to a level of design bid funding, like to have cost certainty on that. It just,
Yeah.
it's just
No,
too much that has to be
And I
spent
don't
to
think
get
what
there.
I was trying to articulate was cost certainty as much as it's cost transparency. And I think that a good first step was exactly what you guys did last night of giving the town options. And then I would just say, as you continue that process and you guys have a working group, the more data, the more raw data is just going to help minimize kind of the noise and the chatter and, you know, any sort of misinformation.
And that
So-
was what last night was really intended to
Yeah.
do, right?
That's a
I mean,
great point.
a big part of the criticism of last time was the working group was too closed, okay? That, and so where I get to some of the misinformation gets to mistrust. I've had conversations with people, you know, lengthy conversations with people where I say, okay, I'll take the criticism that that was a closed process and therefore, because it wasn't as transparent, people felt that they couldn't trust. But the inherent sort of underlying piece of that is that you don't believe that the people that were in the room could be objective and actually ask the hard question. So unless you were in the room asking the question is assumed not to have been asked. The same thing applies to, you all approved unanimously that last project, but yet it didn't pass, right? So the same sort of mistrust is actually being conveyed on anybody in any position of authority. And I think we have to get back to a place where, you know what, if I'm too busy to be involved, I have to put some faith in my neighbor and either watch or listen to the conversation that good, hard questions are being asked, right?
And even when you do that, though, like, even last night at the meeting, there were some things that were put on social media today that said, we still don't know where they got these designs, where did these proposals come from, what the next step, like, and all those things were discussed yesterday. You know, we know that they were put out there by people both on the committee and residents, and that, you know, it was clearly lots of discussion. They had another, an extra panel up for more ideas. So I felt like I felt really good about what happened last night, but then those questions were coming like, they didn't do this, and I'm like, no, they actually did all those things. And the way I understood it, that there would be a couple of the top choices, and then at the next select board meeting, maybe we'd be talking about that. So there was clearly steps that were coming. But you could all be sitting in the room and somebody missed it, you know, so then it becomes, this didn't happen.
Rob, could I follow up on something here?
Sure, Joe.
I'm glad you said
Could
that.
come up front,
No,
Joe.
no.
Well, no, for Western.
No, I guess I'm not.
Can I walk it to him? Is that better?
Yeah, I can't.
Joe, you go, you sit down.
Thank you.
That's fine.
I'm glad you said that, Paula, because having attended a few town meetings, I have never seen social media come front and center. And I was so happy, Paul, to hear you say that you took the time, you went to the portal, and you found all the material that you needed. And good citizenship demands that. It's so much easier to look at your phone on the train on the ride home from work and believe whatever you see in front of you. But as Paul did, go to the real resource and find out what's going on. And this has really tied our hands. It's tied our employees' hands trying to deal with social media, because we can't get into, as you alluded to earlier, Rob, into a contest on Facebook. We just can't do that. We just have to put the facts out there. The facts are there, and I'm glad. So, Paul, you made my night. Thanks very much.
Glad to hear that.
And, you know, the other piece to sort of build on that is, you all put your hands up to be here. You know, those of us who are crazy enough to actually run for office have put ourselves out there. We are all neighbors, right? We're all working really hard to try and do the right thing, not just for today, but in the case of the fire station, for the next 50 years, right? You know, when we talked last night and there was somebody suggested it should be built in the same footprint that it exists today. Well, that building was built 75 years ago originally, renovated 50 years ago to accommodate half the number of people that work there, or half the number of people that work there now. So there's two times the number of people it was designed for, and yet we're asking, why is it being built so big? Well, we're building it for the next 50 years,
Yes.
right? So when you get to the level of, we are trying to maintain our commitment to the fire department for their operational need. That's the starting point that everything else comes from.
But in that context, that is the benefit to the town at the cost of building a fire department that's, 2 or 3 times the size. And I guess what I was trying to say earlier is, like, if you put an objective report card for each of those projects, whoever made that comment, that townsperson, he's thinking in his head, an A on a report card would be just, build a new fire station that exact size. But when you double it, that's an F. You know what I mean? And I think that's probably the place at which that individual is making that comment. And I don't think that's out of place, because I think, Rob, what you're articulating is that the benefits of the town, like the necessities, right, outweigh the costs of those incremental costs of building, a much bigger fire department.
No, I didn't say that they outweighed the cost.
Well, but that's what the townspeople are trying to decipher is
Understood.
what's out. So when they hear we're building a fire department 2 to 3 times the size, they're saying that, okay, the report card on the expense side is an F for a variety of reasons, whether it's an F or not for qualitative factors, but from a size perspective, the town is viewing that as a loss, right? But the others, the selectmen are saying that the benefits are outweighing that cost. And I think there's a hyper focus on just the objective costs that really need to be magnified on every single option going forward. But so we don't get lost in the only the benefit side, because the benefit side is what's driving opinions, is what drives misinformation, and as much as we have good intentions, an inefficient process.
So that's what last night was about, was bringing people in to how that all comes together. Here are, if we start with, well, I think we can all agree that we have to build this on town-owned land. That's a prerequisite. It has to be inside of the response radius as identified in the operational studies, right? This corridor is a very busy corridor for our Westwood Fire Department because of all of the senior centers, right? Fox Hill, Westwood Glen, Highland Glen, and now the homes at 45, right? That's a big, big piece of their volume. So you need something that is within the 4-minute response time. When you start to get to those level of considerations, that limits the available options. So last night, you heard us talk about the 8. The 8 did not include the one that has been rejected, right? So, okay, we have feedback on those 8. We're going to continue to solicit feedback on those 8 from people who were not able to be there. Really encourage anybody who's listening out there to go to Westwood Media Center, watch the 30-minute presentation on the 8 options. And then, Molly, they can come to the website, or they can send an email with their thoughts to that board, BOS at Westwood, townhall.westwood.us, .ma.us. So we're very much aware that people felt like they didn't have visibility and didn't get to ask the question up front. Here it is. Here are the options as we see it. And oh, by the way, I had a resident present an option last night that was a variation on one of the options. And when he was presenting it from the mic behind me, I had no idea what he was talking about. But he took the time to actually put together a sketch and came up and we had a conversation afterwards. And I said, thank you. Now I actually can see what it is you were talking about, because when you were talking about rotating the building, you were still going to take out Town Hall. Now I understand and have, a much greater understanding of what you meant. Thank you for bringing forward a positive, productive alternative that can be vetted. That's the type of conversation that I think we need to have.
I think it's just last point, and I'm done talking. I think even though it's going to be painful, and I think a lot of people obviously in this room voted 14-0 for the fire department, to see it voted down was probably disheartening because we all care about this town. I do think this process can be completely reset, not just for the fire department, but establish a framework for the middle school, right, going forward. So to get, to solicit feedback, to get, upfront, feedback from the town before we go and just get one choice and have to vote on that one choice.
That's it. That's a presumption that the middle school is what comes out of all of that, but I mean.
I'm just saying,
I hear you.
it'll establish a framework for future capital projects to solicit feedback as early as possible.
For a lot of the discussion that the Long Range Financial Planning Committee is going to have as well, for how do we try to address as many of those needs in as creative a way as possible, so.
Yeah, clearly the landscape has changed. If, I think the middle school would have, these outcry have been as loud if it were, the issue before us was a new school, as opposed to a new fire station. Would the dynamics have been different? And I happen to think they would be. I think there's a greater tolerance for the spending of the town's money for a new school or an investment in a school.
There may be, but there's also an order of magnitude difference. And look, let's acknowledge a few things, right? There's tax exhaustion, right? Because the Pine Hill was a big hit. If we were thinking, okay, operational budget 3%, you look at what we were spending on the Pine Hill, that was going to add another 5%. It should have been about 8%. Your tax bill went up. But because of that shift in commercial versus residential that I spoke of earlier, most people realize the 12% increase. I know, opening that tax bill, I took a deep breath. I was like, damn, like that.
Whose name is on that?
Yeah, exactly. Whose name is on that? So that is a real emotional response, 100%. We've also heard people who are concerned, I don't know what my job certainty is, whether I work in biomedical and there have been research cuts, or my son works for a company where I'm pretty sure he's training the algorithm to take his job at some point, right? So there's people that have concerns about that. And, the economy and inflation being what it is, prices haven't come down, and they certainly have, our wages haven't gone up nearly as fast as all the prices have. So there are real concerns that everybody has. We feel them the same as everybody else. So we are, that's why this conversation about all of these facilities and how do we do this. But if you were talking about this as a school versus the fire station, you're probably talking a 3x, number in terms of what the cost of that's going to be. And that tax exhaustion would still exist. Maybe not to the extent, maybe not to the level of pushback, but it's going to be there. I expect it will be there.
Yeah, no, the point I'm trying to make is now, what do we learn from this process? And I think that's where people have to step back and say, hey, maybe we misunderstood the concerns of the community in a way that caused them for the first time to say, hey, no, we're not going to go with this. Probably some of us, I mean, here we were listening to the information, we all raised our hand, but clearly there needs to be an adjustment as you think forward, because I'm looking at the money's lost from the town for what has happened up to this point. Pretty significant. So as a result, now as we look forward with future projects, things aren't going away. There's going to always be a need to do a school, to do a building, to do whatever. What is it that we're going to do differently as we roll these things out in a way that gets the support?
I think that last night is a good example, right? We got to trust the community to get involved and be able to weigh options and then align behind an option that they think can work, right? I mean, that's what it boils down to. The needs don't go away, and we certainly don't want to be in a situation where we're forced to do something on an expedited timeline because of a tragedy of any sort, right? So we're going to look at these various options that we looked at last night. We're going to talk about what did we hear from the residents, and I think, you know, some of the feedback that we've gotten has been very positive for opening up the floor the way we did and presenting the options the way we did. And at some point, we're going to need to move forward to a level of price specificity, not necessarily certainty, but price specificity to be able to make a final decision to then go to a design bid type of, you know, document that we can then vote on at a
People will
town
be
meeting.
more informed, and be able to make a decision and say,
Yeah. But the other piece to what we talked about earlier is they need to be more informed. That, to Joe's point, there is a responsibility on all of us as residents to ensure that we're informed and making informed decisions. And so that's a piece where we're committed to trying to put out as much information with as much specificity as we can, without having to go all the way to a design bid level of pricing.
Well, thank you guys.
Yeah.
Do I have a motion to close the select board meeting? I will second that out of necessity. All in favor?
Aye.
Select board meeting is now closed.
Thank you, guys.
Can we do the same with the FinCom?
When that station was built in '75, I was there. It was designed for 4 people in that station. Now we have 8. I'm glad Rob gave you the credit you deserve on that.
Make a motion to approve the minutes at.
Second.
Make a motion to approve the minutes as printed.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Abstain? You have to get the abstain.
Can you just raise your hands really quick?
Abstain. Oh, that's right. You have to, like,
Mr. Becker,
Abstain.
you abstaining?
Seven.
So I think it's everybody that wasn't here.
Yeah.
No, only people raising their hands are abstaining.
Okay.
Otherwise, it
Oh.
would pass.
Any other business anybody wants to bring
I'd
up?
like to bring it before.
Alex?
We're gonna beat the crap out of
Either
your
join
job.
the meetings or participate, or you don't.
Make
do
a motion
anything.
to adjourn.
So moved.
Next meeting.
Oh, okay. One quickly, the next meeting's November 12th. The planning board will attend, and we'll have the fair housing training with the new members of the planning board at the same time. So it'll be a joint meeting. It's a Wednesday.
And is it, yes,
We're gonna make it.
It's a
Make
Zoom?
it hybrid, right?
Yeah.
We'll make it hybrid.
Hybrid.
So we'll be in that room.
I think there was a second.
Now there's, I heard a
Second, there was a second.
second, yep.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No, we're good.